KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Nearly 3 decades ago, Colorado was known as the hate state. In 1992, Colorado voters passed Amendment 2, which banned anti-discrimination laws meant to protect gays, lesbians, and bisexuals. But the amendment never went into effect because there was immediate backlash. It was challenged again and again for being unconstitutional, bringing it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
The Amendment 2 decision by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1996 will certainly go down as the Supreme Court decision that changed how LGBT people were talked about. And that was a sea change.
That was Glenda Russell, a psychologist who studied the effects of the amendment on Colorado's queer population. She's featured in Season 4 of KUNC's Colorado Dream podcast, which is all about the evolving relationship Colorado has with its queer and transgender population. Stephanie Daniel is the executive producer and host for the Colorado Dream, and she joins me now to talk about this new season, which began earlier this week. Stephanie, welcome to In The NoCo.
Hi, Erin. Thanks for having me.
Stephanie, you start the series off by retracing how Amendment 2 got on the ballot in the first place. Who was behind this?
So an organization called Colorado for Family Values, and it was based in Colorado Springs, the group created Amendment 2 as a response to the cities of Aspen, Denver, and Boulder, which had passed new laws to protect lesbian, gay, and bisexual people. What we uncovered during the course of this episode is that there was evidence that the people who were behind Amendment 2 came to Colorado Springs from Southern California to work on business development for religious organizations. Jean Dubofsky, who is the lead attorney and strategist in the effort to overturn Amendment 2, she has this quote that we put in the episode that says she found evidence that various far-right religious groups had begun anti-gay rights efforts after communism went away in the late 80s. They lost anti-communism as a way to raise money. So basically, she says Amendment 2 was really about fundraising.
Media at the time looked very different from how it does today. You followed some of the history of the use of tabloids and videotapes that were circulated by a right-wing conservative group from Colorado Springs. And there were some major players championing this measure. Will Perkins was one such individual.
The tabloid was instrumental because it was something that anyone that was interested could sit down and certainly see from our perspective what the issues were and how to vote.
Can you talk about why this use of media was so effective in promoting the amendment?
Well, I think there were probably a lot of Colorado voters who didn't know any LGBTQ plus people, or at least thought they didn't. And then they go to their church or another trusted institution and see a video called The Gay Agenda that contains unattributed and unverifiable statements and claims that gay people were politically devious and plotting special laws to get special rights. Through our reporting, we found that 4,000 VHS copies of the video were distributed around the state. That means that it turned up in, a church in Steamboat Springs, a college Republican meeting in Golden. And then also during this time, the HIV and AIDS epidemic was all over the news. In 1992, AIDS became the #1 cause of death for U.S. men ages 25 to 44. We know anyone, no matter your sexual orientation or gender, can get HIV. But back then, it was closely associated with gay men. Backers of Amendment 2, people like Will Perkins and his group, they tapped into this fear, and their tabloid included a full page that stigmatized the gay community.
Well, Stephanie, it didn't take long for Coloradans to voice their disapproval of this amendment. What happened after Amendment 2 was passed?
The backlash was swift. Colorado was quickly labeled the hate state, and we found that, hate crimes against LGBTQ plus folks skyrocketed. There was a national boycott led by over 100 groups and celebrities. And within a year, more than 60 companies had canceled conventions or meetings here. Concerts were canceled. It was a big deal. And these boycotts cost the state millions of dollars.
there seemed to be a real culture shift that happened around how people talked about and even celebrated the rights of LGBTQ plus people. Why do you think that happened?
If we look back in history, for hundreds of years, groups of Americans have fought for rights. We think about women's rights, civil rights, marriage rights, the list goes on. And here comes this amendment that a majority of Colorado voters had approved that did the opposite. When Amendment 2 passed, Colorado became the first state to legalize discrimination against, at that time, gay, lesbian, and bisexual people. So there were many folks who were not going to let that stand.
In 1996, Romer versus Evans was brought to the U.S. Supreme Court challenging Colorado's Amendment 2. Jean Dubofsky was the lead attorney on that case. She successfully argued that Amendment 2 was unconstitutional because LGBTQ plus people deserve equal protection under the 14th Amendment. And there's a great moment in the first episode with Dubofsky going head-to-head with Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia.
Where does it say that in the Colorado Supreme Court?
It says that on page B-3, D24.
Okay.
Well, for years, when I argued cases, I'd write down on the margin the page number. Something important was on. Never been asked about.
Prohibit any government from adopting
And so he starts reading a sentence.
protective statutes, regulations, orders in the future.
And I could say, no, it's not that sentence. It's the one above.
Yes, and it refers back to the first sentence. It says that the immediate objective of Amendment 2 is, at a minimum, to
And
repeal existing...
he was furious. He slammed his book shut and hurled it at the little thing that goes right in front of him.
Just goes to show you how important doing your homework is.
I'm saying, Erin, I love that moment in the podcast. It was really cool to hear Dubofsky going back and forth with Justice Scalia.
How is this moment emblematic of the fight to prove that Amendment 2 was unconstitutional?
So when she appeared in front of the Supreme Court, she brought with her that anti-gay tabloid that we talked about earlier. And she said it was the key to striking down the amendment because it proved impermissible bias. And she was right. The Supreme Court overturned Amendment 2 and wrote that classifying LGBTQ plus people not to serve a legislative end, but to make them unequal, there was no rational basis for that.
The rest of the season talks about Colorado's current climate in LGBTQ plus rights. What are the challenges for people living here today?
There's a lot going on, and we will cover some of these issues during the rest of the season of the Colorado Dream podcast. We're going to be focusing on Pride events and the challenges some LGBTQ plus people still face as they hold these events, gender-affirming care, and how Colorado is a leader in helping queer and transgender people access the care they need. And then finally, we examine how Colorado has evolved from the hate state to the first state in the country to elect an openly gay governor. And that's all I'm going to say. I don't want to spoil it. You'll have to listen to the podcast to hear more.
Senior managing editor and reporter Stephanie Daniel hosts KUNC's podcast, The Colorado Dream, Ending the Hate State. The new season is underway now. You can find The Colorado Dream at KUNC.org or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's it for us today on In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thank you so much for listening.